Welcome to another episode of Moonshots. This week, I have one of the greatest scientists I've had pleasure of meeting and working with, Dr. Vuyisich. He is not only the world's expert in understanding how to analyze the human body. His journey to America has been one amazing, impressive story. So this episode is just my personal favorite. I'm looking forward to talking to Dr. Vuyisich. So Momo, welcome to Moonshots.
Thank you, Naveen.
So, the Moonshots is all about audacious ideas. And to me, I want to step back for a second and want to hear about your journey to America, how you got here, and what is it that you're currently doing?
Okay, so this is 1992. I had just graduated from high school, and there was a civil war going on in Yugoslavia. And according to the military rules, as soon as you graduate from high school, if you're a man, you go straight to the war. And I was recruited by the military to become a gunner, which is basically shooting people. And I didn't obviously want to do that. And so
not only shooting people, that is really how many people ever come back. Probably most of them died.
Many of them died, exactly. So it was obviously a traumatic experience in every possible aspect you can think of. So I didn't want to go to the war under any circumstances. And so one of the ways to avoid the war was to enroll in medical school. And so I went to Belgrade and signed up to go through the entrance exams for the medical school and found out that there were tens of thousands of young men trying to get into that medical school, and the number of positions was very limited. And it also turns out that most of those positions were already purchased by wealthy people. And so really, these tens of thousands of men were applying truly for just a very few positions. Wow. And so we had an entrance exam that included physics, chemistry, biology, and Latin language, which is sort of a weird thing, but in medical terms, there's lots of Latin language. So those 4 exams, they lasted, I think, either a full day or maybe a couple of days.
Wow.
Luckily, I was prepared, and I actually was one of the few that got into that medical school. So
stop for a second. You're saying that you were facing death, and the only way to avoid death is to get into this college. And the only people who were get into the college are really the wealthy people, and very few people who actually will go through the process of these days and days of these exams.
Yeah.
And not only, you literally at this point are waiting for this to happen, or else you face death.
Or else you go straight to war and start killing people and start dodging bullets. Yeah, it was a really tough situation emotionally, of course. Yeah.
So here you are, you managed to get into the college.
So I got into the medical school, and then instead of going to classes and trying to actually finish medical school, I really wanted to get out of the country. I wanted the opportunities that there were here in the United States. And so I worked at the biggest newspaper in Yugoslavia, actually, 7 days a week. And I was the desktop publisher for the newspaper.
So here's the thing. I know you shared with me once that even after you decided to leave, even just leaving wasn't easy. So even if you find something, it wasn't the easiest way to just get out. It's not like you purchase a ticket and get out.
Yeah, exactly. So men were prohibited from leaving the country. And so they were also not allowed to get a passport at that time. But luckily, I was proclaimed to be the best high school student in my home state. And then I worked at a research institute that sent me to a conference in London the previous summer. And so because of that, I was allowed to get a passport.
So you were in high school and you were going to the conference in London.
Yeah, I went to the conference there. And so that was the chain of events that allowed me to exit the country, right? So that was step number 1. I was able to obtain a passport under special circumstances, even though I was not otherwise allowed to get a passport. So I had a passport, which was great, right? But then even if you had a passport, if you were a man between some young age and some very old age, you were not allowed to leave the country. And so I waited in Belgrade, and I took care of all the paperwork, but the next ordeal was getting the visa, right? I mean, you may not realize how difficult it is to get a visa from the United States at that time, because everyone was trying to leave Yugoslavia, and the consulate personnel knew that if you left Yugoslavia, you're not coming back. And so they wanted essentially proof that you have something to tie you back to the country that will make you want to come back. But I had no such thing. So I simply every time that I applied, they rejected me and they stamped in my passport not to come back for 6 months. But 3 weeks later, I just brought some more paperwork and I was back applying. And so I applied 4 times, and the 4th time they finally issued me a visa. I don't actually know, what tipped the scale. But I had my visa now for the United States to come as a student, but I couldn't exit the country because the borders were closed to men. And so now it's May 1993, and there was some sort of a big political pressure to have some sort of an amnesty week. And I have no idea why this came about, but all of a sudden the government announced an amnesty week, which means that week, the second week of May of 1993, they allowed men with passports to leave the country. And so this is all of a sudden a massive exodus. You go to the train station or a bus station and there's just a million people trying to get out of the country. And so I waited at the bus station for 24 hours and got onto a bus to go to Budapest. This is in Hungary because there was an embargo. So there were no flights leaving Yugoslavia at that time because of the war. And then the next challenge came. We came to the border, and now the Hungarian border crossing guards, they knew that we were desperate. And so they would not allow us to enter their country unless we all paid money. And so they asked every single passenger to pay them personally 50 German marks at that time, right? And so most of our people on the bus paid, and the lucky circumstance for me was that I had exactly 50 German marks. That's literally the only bill I had in my possession, 50 German marks. And so I paid, and most of us on the bus paid.
So you're saying is that all your possession was that 50 German marks, and you ended up giving that to Brian.
I ended up, exactly. So I literally entered the United States with no money, 0 money on me. And so, So we were there at the border, and it's like 3 a.m, and the flight is leaving from Budapest at like 10 a.m. And so you've got very little time to make it to the flight. And the guards would not allow the bus to pass through until every passenger paid. And so you had 2 or 3 passengers that did not want to pay out of the principle. They were against corruption and they didn't want to pay. And so other people didn't want to pay for them because they felt that they should pay. And so a huge fight broke out on the bus. And so the bus driver started calming people down. And finally, somehow, this situation got resolved and they let us into the country. I don't know how, because I was essentially panicking because my parents paid for my one-way ticket to the United States with all of their savings. So they had no more money. I had no more money. Literally, this was like it. If I didn't fly that day, I was gonna have to go back to Yugoslavia and be stuck there for probably unlimited amount of time. And so finally we got through the border, got to the airport, took off, and I arrived in the US.
Wow. So, Momo, now you are in US here. I mean, first of all, unbelievable. I mean, this is what makes an immigrant. So when people talk about that, how immigrants are in this country, they give everything up to come here, right? Yeah. Because this is a land of opportunity. You are the world's best. I mean, you were the top students here, right? And you came to the United States. Now, just talk about what is it that, I mean, you started working at one of the most prestigious place on earth at Los Alamos National Lab. They don't take anybody. I mean, they only take the world's best, right?
Yeah, it's a very prestigious laboratory, and they do some of the highest quality work.
I know you probably can't talk about 90% of those stuff that you worked on, but in general terms, you were the expert when it came to understanding the human body, the genes and gene expressions and chemicals and the biochemicals.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the government was trying to tackle very complex problems that have to do with chemical and biological weapons and potential attacks on our troops. And so the ability to very quickly and very accurately identify exactly what is being used against our troops and to understand what it can do and how to treat it very quickly without guessing was really important.
So you were working at Los Alamos National Lab, working on this amazing technology that could protect our troop, our country, in terms of from a biological terror, right? And that is, I mean, that's not something you get to hear every day, that, people like you, the scientists who ended up in this country from some foreign country, dedicate their life to protecting our country right here.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about solving big problems. And I was an analytical biochemist, and I wanted to solve big problems from the beginning. I didn't want to just solve small problems.
So what do you say to the people who are saying, that we hate immigrants coming to our country? Tell them that this is the immigrants who actually are working on protecting our own country.
Yeah, I mean, that's their opinions are skewed by political agenda and brainwashing and so on.
So talk a little bit more about what is it that in this particular technology, without disclosing anything that's security clearance or anything, I don't want you to get any trouble here.
Yeah.
Right. So you were working on a technology that was able to identify what these organisms are actually doing, not just who they are, but what they're actually doing, so you can build the antidote for those things and you can cure these people who may be infected.
Yeah, there are some aspects that I can't discuss, but the most important thing is that with one test, you can not only figure out who is there, but what they're capable of doing and how to best treat them.
So you left Los Alamos National Lab to start Viome with me, and essentially with the purpose of how do we go find the cure for many of the chronic diseases, because they all underlying the same mechanism.
Yeah.
So can you just describe a little bit more about what you set out to do?
Yeah. So the goal here and the moonshot here is really to stop guessing and to start understanding the human body, which is very complex. So one of the biggest steps we made in understanding the human body is that we are not alone. Our genes determine a very small fraction of our chronic diseases. It's really the environment and the gut microbiome that causes the vast majority of chronic diseases. And so now we have a new organ essentially that we have to understand that we didn't understand previously, and we have to understand that that organ is producing hundreds and thousands of chemicals that are entering our body and regulating our physiology. So really the only way to understand the root cause of chronic diseases is to digitize our human body. And how are you going to do that? You have to make very accurate and large number of measurements of what we are consuming in our nutrition and who is in our gut microbiome, and then most importantly, what are they doing biochemically? What activities are they actually performing? And then how we as a human host are responding to those activities, and how does that determine the human health and human disease?
So Momo, obviously all this thing you're doing came from your own personal experience of how diet actually impacts the human disease.
Yeah.
And could you share your story of what got this whole thing to be?
Yeah, so in my mid-20s, I developed rheumatoid arthritis, and this is early onset rheumatoid arthritis that had...
What is that thing for most people who don't know?
So that's joint inflammation and soft tissue inflammation and restless leg syndrome and carpal tunnel syndrome and peripheral neuropathy, all these sort of vague spectrum of symptoms that modern medicine doesn't really know how to deal with, except they know how to suppress your immune system. And so as soon as you show up at the hospital...
And you feel basically joint aches and stuff.
Yeah, so I'd wake up. So early on, it was carpal tunnel syndrome and sort of general squeakiness of the joints. For the first few years, it didn't really slow me down. Then for the next 5 years, it slowed me down quite a bit. And then in my late 30s, it was actually starting to affect my life in a pretty severe way. I had to think about every single action that I'm going to do every day. And then I wasn't able to hike, I wasn't able to exercise, I wasn't able to help around the house. I mean, it was just, I had a very understanding wife, which was great, but otherwise it could have ruined my life because I was not able to function as a human being. And so it gradually came on, and modern medicine doesn't understand what the root cause is. And so the only thing the doctors can do is actually prescribe you medications that suppress your immune system. And the side effects were horrendous. And so I went onto the blogosphere and looked at all these diets. That was a hot fad about 5-10 years ago, that you go and read all kinds of forums and find out which diet might work best for you, and then you try it. And so I tried the vegetarian diet. I tried the gluten-free diet, and there's all kinds of anti-inflammatory diets. And I tried those in maybe periods of weeks or months, depending on how they made me feel. And the last diet I tried was the ketogenic diet. It was very, very popular. People raved about it. And even though I grew up eating Mediterranean diet, I thought, okay, let me try this ketogenic diet. And after 3 months of following ketogenic diet, I actually started realizing that I was losing my memory in a very profound way.
Wow. So then you're talking about a keto diet that everyone believes somehow this magical thing, and you're telling him it almost actually, not only just at least killed your brain?
It absolutely destroyed my brain. In fact, I think it's now been about 5 years and I'm still recovering. I still have symptoms left over from that ketogenic diet. And so even though so many people raved about it, it destroyed my memory. I wasn't able to remember things that all my life I was able to remember very easily. And like I said, it's taken 5 years to almost fully recover from that. And so that was such a bad experience that I stopped following these diets because it was literally a pure guess. You start following a diet and maybe a week later you start to feel better and you get all excited and you're like, wow, this must be it. And then a week later you get not only worse, you get worse than what you were before. And so the disease just keeps going through these phases of remission and relapse, and it just keeps cycling and you have no idea what's actually causing it. And it's extremely frustrating to try new things and get excited only to fail. And it's because it's a pure guess. There's no science there whatsoever. And so not only was I able to solve my problem with a science-based personalized diet, so one day I read a study that showed that mammalian products contain a particular kind of a carbohydrate that can cause this kind of symptoms. And so I stopped eating all mammalian products, so that's all red meat and all dairy, and my symptoms not only went away, but my disease and my joint damage actually reversed to completely healthy state. My right hip was starting to lock up. Basically, I had during relapses, I had symptoms such that it was locking up and I wasn't able to walk, and so I was heading for a wheelchair, and it took about a year to recover from that and to heal, but now I have zero problems with my hip.
So how does that work? I mean, you're saying there's something in the mammalian thing?
Yeah, so there's a particular kind of a carbohydrate that is produced by all mammals, but not humans. And when you eat mammalian products, you actually incorporate that carbohydrate into our own cells. And these cells are endothelial cells, so they're found in joints and arteries and connective tissue. And so we incorporate that carbohydrate, and our immune system, because we don't produce it, our immune system recognizes it as a foreign molecule and mounts a very low-grade inflammatory response. And over time, you essentially destroy your joints and your connective tissue.
So it's very interesting. So how is it that some people are obviously able to eat dairy and eat mammalian products, and they eat beef, and they don't seem to have that. So there must be something specifically that changes. It's really specific to some people.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know the science. This is essentially a new science. So this mechanism was discovered in late 2014, and the person who discovered this, Dr. Ajit Varki at University of California, San Diego, since he published that paper, he has not been able to get a single grant funded to continue this research. And so we don't know much about this mechanism beyond what was published originally. So I have some hypotheses. I think that during breastfeeding of a child, if the mom consumes mammalian products and then passes that carbohydrate to the child, then the immune system learns to actually tolerate it. That's one potential hypothesis. Another hypothesis that I have is that actually I think that millions of people do have low-grade inflammation due to this mechanism. It's just that they don't know what to do about it, and it causes things like heart attack and multiple sclerosis and maybe other diseases as well.
All right. So now it's just fast forward here. So now you're working at Viome. What are you doing specifically there? And just talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So one of the most important things that we're working on that I'm extremely excited about, and really why we founded Viome, is to bring science to this personalized diets. And so if you go and try to figure out a personalized diet, you basically go read some blogs, try different things, and maybe some things work, some don't. We don't take that approach. We actually make measurements, very accurate measurements of what people are consuming, and then we make very accurate measurements of what biochemical pathways the gut microbiome of each person actually performs. And let me talk about these biochemical pathways. So when you consume food and it goes into your intestines, the first dibs on that food you don't get. It's actually your gut microbiome that gets the first dibs. And so you can think of the gut microbiome as a collection of chemical reactions that process the molecules found in your food into so-called secondary metabolites. These are just another set of biochemicals. And so you can think of the gut microbiome as a collection of thousands of biochemical reactions where they take molecules from your food, convert them for energy into hundreds and thousands of other biomolecules, biochemicals, that enter your bloodstream and regulate your health. And so let's talk about some of those biochemicals. So all vitamin Bs, right? So vitamin B1 and B6, all of those are produced by our gut microbiome. We can also talk about very important short-chain fatty acids. Those are also produced by the gut microbiome, and the substrate for those biochemical reactions are actually in your foods. And so if you think about that, we can actually now quantify these biochemical reactions. We can identify them and quantify them. And now for every single person, we can say, aha, we know what your gut microbiome needs to be producing and what it should not be producing. So let's take a very common example, inflammation, right? So we all have heard about inflammation, and we all have heard that it's likely the root cause of most chronic diseases. And yet the root cause of inflammation is not known. Well, we put the pieces together of the puzzle, and we now understand that it's the gut microbiome that is regulating inflammation. So gut microbiome can produce biochemicals that cause inflammation and that reduce inflammation. So these are pro-inflammatory chemicals that cause inflammation and anti-inflammatory chemicals that reduce it. So now for each person, and this is the key word, each person, depending on their gut microbiome and what their biochemical activities are in the gut microbiome, we can place foods in the minimize and avoid list that their gut microbiome is going to use to produce pro-inflammatory biochemicals. So we deny their gut microbiome those foods, and their gut microbiome no longer can produce pro-inflammatory biochemicals.
So that reduces inflammation.
That reduces inflammation. On the other hand, we understand what their gut microbiome needs from their foods in order to produce anti-inflammatory biochemicals, and so we will ask them to eat foods, we will recommend them foods that their gut microbiome, and again, emphasis on their gut microbiome, will use those foods to produce anti-inflammatory biochemicals. And now for that person, we can tell them exactly what to eat and what not to eat such that their gut microbiome produces less of the pro-inflammatory chemicals and more of the anti-inflammatory chemicals and reduce inflammation. And the keywords that I used, each and this person's gut microbiome, is that it's very personalized. And what we found in our studies and our analyses is that for the most part, every person's gut microbiome is different. We have vastly different gut microbiomes to the tune of 99% different, whereas our genetics is essentially identical. It's 99% plus identical. Gut microbiomes are very, very different. And so this is where we have to use science, such as the chemistry of the gut microbiome and the math equations that tie the substrates in the foods and the output of the gut microbiome that regulates our health. When we combine that chemistry and math, now we can have machine learned algorithms that make personalized diet recommendations. So today, when a customer signs up for Viome, instead of us having some number of nutritionists and functional medicine doctors reviewing those data and saying, well, in my experience, I think this should work or this shouldn't, there are no humans involved, there are no opinions, there are no anecdotes. There's just data from tens of thousands of customers over time and dozens of research studies that we have carried out that allow us to use math and chemistry to make science-based personalized recommendations.
Now, that is an amazing stuff. I mean, so you're telling me this is something that people can go buy today and they can use it today and benefit from it?
Absolutely. So not only have we been able to work out machine learned models for lowering inflammation, but we just submitted a publication that's in a preprint where we have developed a machine learned model from a very large study that tells people exactly what carbohydrate rich foods to eat and which ones to avoid in order to control their blood sugar. And so this is a study published in a bioarchive journal, and so you can look it up. And so in this particular study, we fed 550 people for 2 weeks for a total of 27,000 meals.
Wow.
And measured their blood glucose during that 2-week period and recorded all of that data. And then we obviously collected their stool sample prior to the study and then built very accurate machine learned models that can now tell every single person based on their gut microbiome what to eat and what not to eat.
Look, that is just an amazing, because so to some extent you believe the food can actually be the drug. And this morning I was reading amazing research in the Nature magazine that talks about that even the drugs people take from the pharma companies, their effectiveness actually depends on your gut microbiome.
Absolutely, Naveen. So remember what I said earlier, that just think of the gut microbiome as a set of thousands of biochemical reactions, right? They're able to take in a lot of different kinds of chemicals and convert them to some other chemicals for the purpose of harvesting energy. And so it's no surprise that, again, when you take a medication, that goes first to the gut microbiome. And if they have an enzyme that will convert that molecule into a different kind of molecule and harvest energy from that process, they will do it. And now you're orally consuming a molecule, but what actually ends up being absorbed is a different molecule.
Wow. So then how are these pharma companies and not even looking at this gut microbiome and prescribing the same drug to everyone? And here you are telling me 99% of the people have very different microbiome, but they all get the same drug when you go there.
So the gut microbiome is actually the explanation for why there are no drugs that work on everyone, right? You feed 100 people the same drug with 100 people with the same disease, the same drug. And even though we're genetically nearly identical, the responses can be vastly different. Some percentage of people will actually have a positive response, meaning their disease will go down. But in most cases, more than 50% of the people will not respond to a drug. And now we're realizing for the first time, it's not really the genetics that plays a key role here. It's the gut microbiome that plays a key role in the efficacy of drugs. And we really have to bring gut microbiome to the forefront of pharmaceuticals, where we can personalize pharmaceuticals based on known responses to those pharmaceuticals based on the gut microbiome.
But why is it that it's not illegal to prescribe a drug today, when knowing that half the people or large percentage of people actually are not only not going to benefit, they may actually be harmed by it, because they may convert one molecule into completely different molecule that could completely be harming this person.
Yeah.
And even then it's not illegal. What about these vaccines? I mean, are they have something similar there?
Well, let's talk first about pharmaceuticals. So pharmaceuticals do have side effects, and in fact, severe side effects. And I actually read an article yesterday that it's estimated 35,000 people in the United States die per year from the side effects of biologics that are used against TNF-alpha for autoimmune diseases.
Hang on for a second here. This is the drug that is prescribed when you have an autoimmune disease.
That's right. So these are biologics. They're injectable antibodies that bind TNF-alpha and suppress the immune system. But because of the immune system suppression, there are lots of side effects, very severe side effects. So these are very serious drugs that are taken, but these are also very severe diseases.
Why is it's not absolutely required for a pharma company to prescribe a gut test and then decide which one of the many drugs that might work?
Well, that's the technology for understanding that precision medicine has not been available. Now, for the first time, we have that technology, and now we can actually bring that technology to the market and enable precision pharmaceuticals.
So you're saying is that today that technology is available, but even then, it is not required by law that pharma companies, before they develop a drug, actually do the microbiome test, because if the drugs are going to be changed by microbiome, why are they not required to do that?
That's more of a political, I think, question. The science is there, so we should really use the science towards that goal, and I don't know why it's not illegal.
So now, Momo, look, just tell the audience about your view of where you think the world is going to be in the next 5 to 10 years, and just talk about what is it that you believe is going to happen next 5 to 10 years, what you're excited about.
Oh, I don't believe in this. I mean, this is pure science. What we're going to be able to do is introduce food-based therapies for chronic diseases. So it's absolutely become clear from all of the data that we have gathered at Viome that we will be able to prevent and treat chronic diseases just by personalized foods. And so we are on the way there. We now understand exactly what biochemical activities by the gut microbiome are correlated with different diseases. And now we're moving in the next phase of the company, which is the therapeutic phase, where we're going to actually do prospective interventional studies that are going to show that our personalized diet intervention actually works better than placebo and can treat and prevent chronic diseases. So that's really the next phase of our company. And I think within a year or two, we are going to have such personalized treatments for a few of the most prevalent diseases in the world, such as diabetes, depression, obesity, and IBS.
Now, so Momo, is it fair to say that in our lifetime, we will be able to make chronic diseases simply a matter of choice?
Absolutely no doubt about it. Chronic diseases are most of the time not caused by our genetics. It's not. There's no like Alzheimer's disease or Parkinson's or lupus or rheumatoid arthritis where we can test someone and say you will get this disease. We don't, because it's not actually encoded by our genetics. And so it's all environmental diseases. These are all environmental diseases. And if we understand how the environment causes these diseases and we prevent that mechanism from happening, which we are at Viome, then there's not going to be chronic diseases for a vast majority of people. Now, there are some genetic components that we don't quite understand understand yet. And so some people will likely need medication, but we're talking about vast minority of people.
So, Dr. Vuyisich, this has been absolutely an amazing, fascinating conversation here. And you heard it here for the first time that in our lifetime, we're going to look at the world, we're going to be living in a world where actually being sick, especially from a chronic disease, is going to be simply a matter of choice, not a matter of bad luck. I can tell you that I don't know about you, but I can't wait for the world to happen. And someday our children and grandchildren are going to thank us for what we have done here. So thank you, Dr. Vuyisich, for being on this show.
Thank you. I just want to say one more thing. The way we operate at Viome is based on the saying that if you want to predict the future, the only way to do that is to invent it. And that's exactly what we're doing at Viome. We're so hyper excited to be driving this company forward is because we're truly inventing the future. So we know what it's going to bring.
Well, we're going to put a link to Viome at the show notes here. So, but Dr. Vuyisich, it's an absolute pleasure. And I've learned so much.
Thank you, Naveen. Thank you, Naveen.
Thank you.